this was about as bizarre and as easy as it gets.
So the number for me was a number that would allow me to never have to work.
I feel like we got top.
I went from a sale of $500,000 to in debt.
$192 million.
This is Built to Sell Radio with your host, John Warrillow.
Hey there, it's John Warrillow. Listen, if you're brand new to Built to Sell Radio, welcome. It's good to have you along for the ride. We've been doing this show now for 5 years. I've interviewed literally a different entrepreneur every week for the past 5 years. And I've taken some of their best practices, their tips and tricks and negotiation hacks, and distilled them all into a field guide. It's a book called The Art of Selling Your Business. And it is a little bit of a recipe card for you to punch above your weight when it comes to negotiating with an acquirer. You can get it at builttosell.com/selling. Welcome to this special edition of Built to Sell Radio. It's called Built to Sell Intel, where we break down the last month that was on Built to Sell Radio. We interviewed 4 amazing guests last month. And Dr. Jeremy Weisz is my partner in crime today. Jeremy has interviewed thousands of entrepreneurs at Rise 25, and we're going to flip the script a little bit. And Jeremy is going to interview me about the 4 interviews that we did for Built to Sell Radio last month. So Jeremy, over to you.
John, thanks for having me. I'm excited about this episode because we're going to recap some of the biggest takeaways from last month. Also, we'll overlay your thoughts and advice, which I'm excited to hear because you ask amazing questions, you listen really intently, but I don't get to hear your advice on the interview. So this is going to be especially valuable for everyone. And if you are here and you don't know John or his work, which I assume most people do, but John Warrillow is the founder of the Value Builder System. It's a simple software for building the value of a company. It's used by thousands and thousands of businesses worldwide, and the Value Builder System incorporates several diagnostic tools, including the Value Builder Score. If you haven't taken it, you should. I mean, I've taken it. Both my business partner and I have taken it. And it's offered by a global network of independent advisors known as certified value builders. So those businesses that achieve a value builder score of 90 or greater are worth double the average performing business. And his best-selling book, Built to Sell, Creating a Business That Can Thrive Without You, was recognized by both Fortune and Inc. as one of the best business books of 2011 and has been translated in 12 languages. John, everyone I talk to not only has read it once, but more than once. I mean, people read it multiple times, including myself, actually. And John is obviously
the remedial learning category.
Yeah, maybe I'm a slow learner, or maybe I just find it fascinating.
Well, you know what I found out? I found out yesterday that it's been translated into Mongolian. No word of a lie. I'm like, Mongolian, really? That's a huge market. So who knows?
Hopefully someone from there is on this webinar and listening.
Yeah, it'd be good. It'd be great. I'd love to.
You're also, obviously, we're listening to this. You're the host of the Built to Sell Radio, which is ranked by Forbes and one of the world's 10 best podcasts for business owners. You also wrote The Automatic Customer, which is creating a subscription business in any industry. And you completed the trilogy with The Art of Selling Your Business, which is winning strategies and secret hacks for exiting at the top. And, prior to that, people don't know, you also started and exited 4 companies, including one acquired by a public company. And you can check all this out at builttosell.com, but also builttosell.com/radios, where you can get these podcasts. And I would suggest listening to these in their entirety. And the first one is with James Preble. And, John, you interviewed James Preble. He co-founded Palladium Digital, which is a consultancy helping companies think about their digital strategy. And the company experimented with various business models until they landed on helping private equity groups get a return on their investment. And the private equity groups hired Palladium to perform digital due diligence, as you could say, and they reached £1 million in annual revenue pretty quickly. So, John, starting with that, what did you like about James's story?
Oh, so much to like. I mean, young guy. What a cool niche they found. In the early days, they were kind of, I think in James, his own admission, they were floundering a little bit, right? Like they were digital strategists, and frankly, right now, everybody's a digital strategist, right? Like there's so many people masquerading as digital strategists. It's always kind of like the flavor of the month. And they felt that, right? It was hard for them to win customers, and they were competing and trying to differentiate themselves. But again, anyone can kind of claim to understand how to, do SEO and buy search terms and do social media. And then they discovered that private equity groups are trying to figure out the kind of what M&A guys call like the Rembrandt in the attic, right? You've heard that term, I'm sure, where like the homeowner doesn't know they're sitting on this gold mine in their attic. And that was James's sort of strategy. These private equity groups are looking for this kind of sleeping giant, so to speak, that has not monetized or capitalized on its latent social media possibility, digital kind of possibility, and thereby buying that company would enable them to own the company, transform it through a creative digital strategy, and add a tremendous amount of value. What I think was so cool is they picked that niche. We call it monopoly control, one of the 8 drivers of company value, of serving private equity groups. It's like a niche of a niche of a niche, but it worked for them. And I think that really stood out for me as like a really smart approach.
Yeah, John, I wanted to hear more about, so when we think of the 8 key drivers in Built to Sell, you mentioned the monopoly control, which is how well differentiated their business are. What were some other the drivers at play in James's story?
I mean, that's really, that was the big one. They had a really strong point of differentiation. They had good financial performance, as you mentioned. Financial performance is one of the other drivers. They'd reached £1 million in turnover, which is kind of a threshold where the business goes from, maybe James and a kind of an associate or two, largely no value, to a real business, right? With £1 million, it's roughly $1.6 million or $1 million, depending on the exchange rate, $1.6 million, $1.8 million in US dollars. It's now got sort of a half dozen employees. They're starting to kind of get some traction. So I think from a financial performance structure, they were doing quite well. They had staged billing as well. Valuation teeter-totter is where the positive cash flow of the business has an impact on its value. So they charged the private equity group on a staged billing platform, so they weren't all back end loaded. So they had a couple of things. But for me, Jeremy, the real story, I think, with James Preble was doing one thing better than anybody else, which was this kind of digital due diligence for private equity groups. Again, I can't stress enough. Like, I don't know if you've interviewed thousands of entrepreneurs, but I feel like it's the sleepy corners of the economy where all the money gets made, right? Like the big sort of,
these
trying
niches
to create an electric
that
car.
you don't even think about.
Right. Yeah. Like, who knew there was a company that did digital due diligence? First of all, what is digital due diligence? First time I'd ever heard the term was on the call. And I'm like, wow, that's such a cool thing. I'd never even thought about digital due diligence. And then there's like this whole company that does that for private equity groups. And by the way, the private equity groups are thinking of a digital strategy as their big play. Man, I didn't even, it was mind blowing. But again, that's one thing about doing this show for so long. I feel like there's always these businesses who are like, I can't believe there's a company that does that. And it creates millions of dollars in revenue and sells for a truckload of money. But anyways, that's what I found to be most kind of interesting about James's story.
One of the things that made me nervous about the interview, John, was, and you asked him about the hiring process, because you're two people, and that kind of goes into the Switzerland structure of how dependent is this. What were your thoughts on when he said, "Oh, it's me," and they were looking to hire, and how they were hiring as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you haven't listened to the episode, it's worth listening to that section, because I think it was kind of a cool. James did some really cool stuff to attract kind of young millennials, because my initial reaction, hearing him say, when it went beyond James himself, I was like, well, how do you hire people? He was describing, trying to convince the top people from Oxford and Cambridge. By the way, James's company is based in the UK, so the top universities, Oxford, Cambridge, et cetera. And he was describing how he was recruiting these people to come work for this kind of little startup. And what little I know of the kind of digital universe right now is people who are really smart and understand digital are in high demand, right? Like Deloitte, every blue-blooded sort of consultancy out there is trying to recruit very smart people with digital chops right now for their digital practices. And I'm like, how do you compete with the likes of Deloitte and McKinsey and these people that are all trying to vie for these young people? And I think his response was like, it's about flexibility and it's about giving them a shot to do something in a young company that they wouldn't have the opportunity to do at a Deloitte or McKinsey. And I think that was really interesting fodder and really thoughtful about how it wasn't just James and some helpers, that he was really able to recruit some really smart people.
So when we talk about the 9 subscriptions, and the automatic customer piece, or did you see any at play or that could have been at play?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do not believe we didn't get into it, but I think you might have mentioned it. He had a subscription model, so no, I don't think there was a subscription model at play. I don't know. It is such a transactional business. Like digital due diligence, as I came to learn, was this thing that private equity companies would do in order to evaluate a company they were considering investing in or buying outright. And so by the very nature of what they do, every transaction is different. It's very lumpy. So that's one area that was maybe problematic to their business model. And I don't know if they'd explored recurring revenue. One thing that they may have tried that could have worked perhaps would have been doing some sort of benchmarking subscription research that they could have sold to multiple private equity groups. Like if you the big advertising agencies, for example, they do these like brand equity studies, and they measure the value of Coca-Cola versus Google and versus Harley Davidson, and they kind of put some sort of economic value to them. Maybe they could have created some sort of digital benchmarking value to kind of smaller mid-sized companies that it's not fully fleshed out in my mind, but maybe there'd be something there that multiple private equity groups could subscribe to that would have given them a little bit of subscription revenue, but more importantly, it would have given them visibility into all of those private equity groups and ongoing relationships with all those private equity groups. So yeah, the model they had didn't necessarily lend itself to recurring revenue, but maybe there was something that they could have done there.
No, I love that because it kind of gets the creative juices flowing on other options, right? Because people listening right now, that may spark something in their business model to go, oh yeah, I should be doing something similar to that. And then were there anything that stuck out as negotiation high points, low points, or things that parts where you saw they were prepared? Because I know in the art of selling your business, you talk about kind of that punching above your weight and about building your negotiation leverage. Did anything stick out as far as negotiation or how they were prepared for certain things?
Yeah, I mean, they sold to a consolidated marketing services company that's buying up various different assets. So they're buying, digital companies, they're buying, emails, they're buying lots of different to create an integrated marketing services solution, which is happening in that marketing services space all over the place. So the marketing services is an area that's very hot in the M&A world. There's lots of companies being acquired, even very, very small businesses. Again, Prebble's business was relatively small, again, £1 million in turnover, so it's fairly early. I think the one thing that it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback when you have time to think about it, and hindsight's 2020. I think maybe the one thing, if I was coaching James a little bit, I might have said was it was super early. Like they had just it was very early in their life cycle as a company, and so maybe there was, they sold, and a lot of it is back end loaded. So a lot of the value will be on the earnout, and of course earnouts can be at risk. I think the early days of that relationship are going really well. They describe the partnership they have with the various other companies, and it's really performing well. So I think it's going to work out fine. But of course, with an earnout, there is some risk associated with that. And I think if they'd been maybe a little bit later, maybe 3 or 4 million pounds in turnover, say $5 million in revenue, they might have gotten a little bit more of the upfront payment, made it a little less at risk in an earnout. Again, it's easy for me to Monday morning quarterback that in hindsight. It was a great deal for them. They structured it so that they will have lots of capital in order to grow the business, and they are poised, if it goes well, to hit their earnout figures. So I think it'll work out just fine. But again, maybe I'm just a bit of a control freak. I don't like having my destiny tied to someone else's decision making. But again, it's easy for me to say that in hindsight.
Yeah. No, I don't know if they would disagree with any of that, right? I want to take questions, so put them in the chat. But while I ask you this, John, when you talk about earnout and the risk, how should people think about when someone offers earnout?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's a bit of gravy. I think personally, if you think about what an earnout is, you're giving up control over your company, and you are signing up as an employee of another company to achieve a certain goal. And it can work out fabulously well, and it can also work out terribly. Some people refer to it as a jail sentence. Again, a very free-spirited entrepreneur who is used to calling their own shots, I think is going to find an earnout like a really difficult time. So I would love for listeners to get to the point where the majority of their proceeds from the sale of their company is cash at closing, and they think of the earnout as the kind of cherry on top of the cupcake. It's great if they hit it, but if they don't, hey, that's okay. That's okay too, because they've been paid fairly for their company. I remember I did an interview Built to Sell Radio. This goes back years ago. If you're interested, type in Built to Sell Radio. Rod Drury, DRURY. We'll put it in the show notes. But Rod built Xero. As you probably know, Xero is the big 800-pound gorilla unicorn company. But before he started Xero, he built a company called Aftermail. And Aftermail had this cool business where it was around the time of Sarbanes-Oxley, that legislation in the United States, and they wanted to basically help big companies to archive their email, among other things. And all these big companies, Fortune 500 companies, have been slapped on the wrist around the whole WorldCom and issue that sparked Sarbanes-Oxley. And as a result, they all were clamoring for this software. Well, long story short, Rogery sells two customers, $1 million each. He's got $2 million of revenue, and he sells his business to Quest Software. Quest has all of the Fortune 500. They all need the software, and so it felt like a very symbiotic strategic acquisition. Rod sold for $15 million cash up front, and the opportunity to sell, or the opportunity to get another $20 million in an earnout. So total $35 million deal, 15 up front, 20 on the come. He was a young guy at the time. So what do you think a young guy with a $15 million check does? He goes out and has a great time and sort of blows off some steam, comes back, and at that point, he'd sort of missed his first gate, because the way an earnout usually works is your budget gets released based on achieving a set of milestones along the way. And if you miss the first one, it's like a downhill ski racer. You miss a gate, you can't catch up. And so he missed the first gate. Long story short, he left Quest, I think it was after 8 months, walked away from the $20 million check because he knew he was never going to get it. And I say that not because I think earnouts are bad. I think earnouts are a realistic, like, especially for a service company, it's almost always going to have some component of earnout. It's just, I think if you can structure it so that the majority of your proceeds are paid up front and the earnout is just gravy, then I think that just helps you sleep better at night.
I remember listening to that one, John, and thinking, oh my God, you better get ahead of it. Like anyone, you better get ahead of it, or you fall behind really quickly. And then it's kind of a big lost opportunity, right?
Yeah.
So I want to get to Andrew Gostecki. This was an amazing story, by the way. But he grew up on using food stamps with his mom. Yeah. His dad died early. he took $50,000 he made in the sale of his first business. He was in college at the time. For a college student, I mean, I remember I made like $2,000. I felt rich. So I don't know how he was feeling with $50,000, but you know, he used it, invested to create a simple template any business could use to create a mobile app. And he, you know, the company was Business Apps. I even remember at the time actually when it came out, and Business Apps grew to more than $7 million in revenue just in 4 years, and he was offered $15 million, I believe, for 70% of the company. He turned it down, which I want to hear your thoughts on that. But he later sold it for more than $20 million. So what are your thoughts on Andrew's story?
I agree, Jeremy. Like Gizdecki is like, it's an amazing story. If you haven't listened to it, you know, it's worth going back. And so just to be clear, the deal was, what he noticed was that the company he started in college was like a little tiny version of Upwork, right? Like a marketplace for freelancers, right? And he noticed that there were a lot of searches for someone to help restaurants to build a mobile app. And he's like, why do all these restaurants want a mobile app? And look at how much they're bidding over each other, falling all over each other to get a mobile app created. And this was around the time where, you know, the iPhone was just kind of hitting its stride, and everybody wanted a mobile app, including every plumbing company, every, you know, fitness company, every gym, every restaurant, all these small businesses, none of which could afford the $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 for a professional development shop to create a mobile app. And so he's like, hold on a second, if we just created like a template that all these restaurants and gyms could use, like we could build it once and then sell it to thousands of different gyms and restaurants. That's how the business came to be. And to your point, I mean, what a cool story. Yeah, he went, and it was like a rocket ship. He was like 22 when he started, and I think when he was like 27 or something, he was 26. Like he was a young person, and he was offered $15 million for 70% of the company. And like my reaction to that is like, how do you turn that down? Like that for a 27-year-old who grew up on food stamps, you know. But knowing, I think, what I know about entrepreneurs, one of the things that we are susceptible to, I think, is riding it over the top, right? Like I think entrepreneurs by their nature are optimistic. Tomorrow's always going to be better than today. And I think for Andrew, he just said, look, we're on a rocket ship. We're already at, you know, worth 15. I'm 25 or 27 or whatever I am. Like, yeah. What's this going to be worth in 5 years, right? And I think that's when his world collapsed. And if you haven't listened to the episode, I kind of don't want to spoil it for you, but I'm going to tell you anyways.
We'll just like open a loop and say, he had to email Tim Cook to get things taken care of, because Apple, there were some things with Apple. Go ahead.
No, I mean, look, here's the problem. The majority of apps at the time were on the App Store, the iTunes App Store, the Apple App Store. And overnight, Tim Cook, and it wasn't Tim Cook, but he obviously would have approved it, but someone lower in the organization made the decision that they would no longer accept mobile apps that were template based. And I can't remember. Do you remember what proportion of his revenue was coming from mobile? It was a bit, like it was like 90% of his.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were panicking because they weren't getting approved, all the apps that they were creating, and it's a panic mode because that's the revenue stream. Yeah,
that's an entire revenue stream, is these small businesses paying them for mobile apps that were not being approved on the App Store. So literally overnight, he goes from being a 27-year-old being offered $15 million for 70% of his company to really staring in the face of bankruptcy. Like it was going to zero. There was like the whole business with one decision at Apple HQ was basically putting them out of business. And he describes the panic in the episode well, and just like the conversations with customers and reassuring his employees. And I mean, God, it kind of like listening to it, I was just like, oh, I've had similar situations in businesses where you're trying to put up a brave face with your employees, but you know that the crap is hitting the fan, right? And so, anyways, he cold emailed Tim Cook. I don't know how he found Tim Cook's email address, whether he just it's actually he uses it in the episode. So if you're interested in cold emailing Tim Cook, you can listen to the episode. But he cold emailed Tim Cook, and he was just watching, sadly, an interview with someone who was struggling with mental illness, and they had used a mobile app for people who struggle with mental illness, and in particular, I think it was depression. And he cold emailed Tim Cook and said, "Do you really?" And it was one of his customers who had this mobile app that helped young people deal with depression. And he emailed Tim Cook and he said, "Do you really want to take this app off of your app store? Look at the good it is doing for this woman who's dealing with mental health issues. This can't be your decision." And that email got forwarded to the head of the App Store, and long story short, they got the decision overturned, and Gizdecki went on to sell his business for more than $20 million. And I mean, great success story. But I think the kind of underlying lesson for Andrew, and certainly for me too, was a good reminder of what we call the Switzerland structure at Value Builder. It's like this dependency on any one customer, employer, supplier. Oftentimes we know about customer concentration. That's something we've heard about a lot. And equally, we know we can't be too dependent on the employee, but we sort of forget about suppliers oftentimes, right? Like, oh yeah, suppliers, whatever. In actual fact, in this case, it was a supplier risk because the iTunes store was effectively a supplier of theirs. And it's referred to in the technology space as quote unquote platform risk. And of course, Andrew came to learn in the most difficult circumstances possible that when you have platform risk, it can undermine the value of your company. In fact, take it to zero if you're too dependent on any one platform. In this case, it was the Apple iTunes store or the App Store, whatever you call it.
Yeah, John, I want to point out that I think people can go to builttosell.com, and if they want to take that score, the Value Builder score, they can find it there, because you just mentioned the Switzerland structure, but there's 8 key drivers and it kind of factors all those in. So I want to point people to that. But so my next question, with this story is, we talked about a few things. Was there anything else, that we talked about a few things that surprised us about this story? And I know, again, there was a million moving pieces swirling around here, but what did maybe Andrew observe, or did you observe that could have made the sale even better?
I mean, what I found really surprising, I think, was how quickly the whole Tim Cook experience changed him as a person, because it wasn't long after Tim Cook made the decision to put template-based apps back on the Apple Store and basically reinstitute Andrew's business. It wasn't long after that he decided to sell quickly, and he wasn't, as he describes in the episode, he wasn't trying to kind of play one acquirer off the other and create a competitive marketplace. He was fairly surgical and quite quick and very motivated to sell his company. And again, in retrospect, I see why, and I understand why. He had gone through a very emotional experience where he saw his business life flash before his eyes. So I get 100%. But it was great to see how quickly he sort of changed. We talk about, and we built a new tool at Value Builder called the Freedom Point. We talk about it a lot. The Freedom Point is the point in time where the sale of your business, the after tax, after you pay your advisors and so forth, that sum of money would effectively fund your lifestyle for the rest of your life. If you sell your business and whatever's left over, you effectively could live for the rest of your life. I think when you reach that point, when your business is worth that much, it's worth asking yourself, okay, is now the time, right? Because if you think about it, Andrew learned in the most painful way possible that he was a poker player, in the game of life. He had all his chips on the table in his mobile app company. The vast majority of his wealth was his business. Like, I'm sure it was probably 95% of his wealth. And overnight, he saw it flash before his eyes. And as a result, he had obviously had this life-changing experience when he restabilized the company and came to learn could be worth more than $20 million for, I guess he was like 27 at the time. Well, clearly that's like more money than anyone would ever need for the rest of their life. And he had reached the freedom point, and he quickly pulled the trigger on a sale. And I thought that was really, first of all, great on his part to realize that, and even a little surprising, just given his age, that he'd come to that sort of that point of wisdom in his life at such a young age. Maybe
I feel like maybe the first offer of the 15 million, right, and then it became 20 million. I'm wondering if he had read Built to Sell way back when, and he wrote down his freedom, because in the story Built to Sell, people, they should get the book. But you recommend people write down that number, seal it up, and when you're ready to sell, pull that out so you don't get too emotional. I wonder if he would have written that out. Maybe he would have written down 7 million, and then he would have opened that envelope, and it would have been, oh, they're offering me 15 million. I don't know, right?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think we and I tried to communicate that in Built to Sell. We move the yardsticks, right? Like when we achieve a certain, we do this in all sorts of ways in our lives, and it's one of the most insidious things that we do to ourselves, especially type A, achievement-oriented, goal-setting people, is like, okay, we put the big goal together, and we say, okay, we're gonna, in our context today, I'm gonna sell my business for X dollars, and you reach a point where it's worth that, and like we're susceptible to moving the chains, right? We're like, well, maybe actually that's not enough. Now I want X. And it's such a dangerous sort of slippery slope, because again, like if the pandemic's taught us anything, it's like nobody knows what tomorrow is going to bring. And if you reach that point where you can get a foot on Maslow's hierarchy of needs and never fall back down again, meaning you can get, I think, what's the first level of that? I mean, you're
it's
a doctor.
Like
you know, the first level is like,
it's
security,
like
right?
Food, shelter, whatever your basic needs.
Yeah, like if you can get like to step 1 or 2 on Maslow's hierarchy of needs and never fear stepping down off that again, like
it's life changing. It's life changing. Yeah. I want to get to Darrell, but I was rooting for Andrew the whole way. I mean, just from his beginning story to, I felt like I was listening to a movie, script, and I'm like, take it. Oh no, he's not going to take it. What's going to happen next? So listen to that episode. Darrell Lerner. Darrell Lerner was on the heels of building a successful online, he built this new company on the heels of building a successful online dating application, and he applied his experience in the dating industry to pet adoption. And he built a website and mobile app called Allpaws. And it allowed users to find a pet based on a variety of criteria important to people considering adopting an animal. And in 2 years, Allpaws accumulated more than 1.5 million registered users. It was receiving nearly 1 million visits per month while ranking in the top 100 of lifestyle apps. And he was around $1 million in revenue. He decided he was going to sell Allpaws, and he decided at the time if he could get at least $3 million for his company, he was going to sell it. So there was a number of things that surprised me, but tell me what your thoughts are on Darrell.
It's what a great story. And talk about like repurposing the wisdom that you got from business 1 to business 2. We often talk about this idea, and it's a bit pejorative, so I don't know if it's the right thing. That your first business is like your training wheels business, right? Like, hey, like go out, make a bunch of mistakes, start it early, start it young, and get all that stuff out of your system, because you're going to learn all the things not to do, and then bring those to your second business. Don't start one business and hold it for 45 years, because you don't have the opportunity to do the mulligan. So I love the fact that he took what he learned in the dating business and brought it to All Pause. I think that's a cool idea. I also think it's interesting, like they chose the advertising business model to monetize the app. As you described, like massive traction, millions of downloads of I can't remember all the statistics you just laid out, but like it was a very, very popular app, but not necessarily monetizing well. And Darrell described that on the episode. He's like it was never going to be a unicorn. Like I built it to whatever it was, $1 million in revenue, but I just didn't see how it was going to grow much further than that. Yet what he had was data, because people who were adopting dogs, which was the business model, it was like a mobile app for dog adoption for primarily. Like, guess what? They need to feed those dogs, and they need dog food, and they need chew toys, and need all the stuff that PetSmart sells, right? And so it was the data that I think made his business valuable. It wasn't necessarily a financial acquisition where they were buying, All Pause profitability or even revenue. It was like it was the data that PetSmart was after, and I thought that was a cool. It goes back to a little bit around the James Preble, the whole Rembrandt in the attic. I mean, in this case, Darrell knew he had a Rembrandt because he knew he had the data, but it's like when your business is maybe worth more than the economics would certainly suggest it's worth. Oftentimes it's this hidden thing about your business that makes it like incredibly valuable to a company. In this case, PetSmart, paid much more than Darrell sort of even dreamed of getting for his business because of the data.
This one also made me nervous because I think you asked at one point, Darrell, how were you thinking of monetizing this? And he's like, I just need to build up the traffic. He had to build up the traffic first before he could think of monetizing, because there wasn't a direct monetization strategy there, right?
There wasn't, but to his credit, if you listen very early, he described how he solved the chicken or egg problem. So in any marketplace, there, two-sided, three-sided marketplace, whatever, it's always how do you deal with the chicken and egg issue, right? I was talking to my wife yesterday. We were talking about the story of Uber and like how they actually got enough drivers to supply enough, people who wanted. Now we just Uber everywhere, and it's just ubiquitous, and we don't even think about it. But at the time, without infinite capital,
it has to reach critical mass at some point.
Yeah, how do you create critical mass so the marketplace works? And so that's always the conundrum. Unless you have just like truckloads of VC money, it's like, how do you create critical mass? In Darrell Lerner's case at All Pause, love this. They partnered with a pet adoption agency, like that had thousands of listings already. So kind of overnight, they uploaded all of their listings onto the All Pause platform, and all of a sudden they'd solved that one piece of the pie, which was inventory, dogs effectively that needed to be adopted. And then they could just focus on getting people who wanted to adopt dogs. Much easier when they had one side of the two-sided market sort of overnight scaled. So they partnered with this kind of national pet adoption agency, which I thought was such a brilliant move out of the gate to solve that conundrum.
Yeah, and I thought, he's a super smart guy. And the other thing he did that was smart, he found that not only could he get the data, but people weren't filtering it. Like no one had asked that company to filter it and filter in certain ways, like if you want this type of dog, or he really figured out a way that people can filter the data on his website, which no one else had done before.
Yeah, they had a great app. It was differentiated. You go back to monopoly control. It was the leader in the market, so it was the best app. So when PetSmart, we said, okay, we want a mobile app, it was quite easy for them to say, well, we want the best one because we're PetSmart. We're not, we can just buy the best, and we don't need to screw around with the kind of second best or the one that's sort of trying to be good. Like, just go to the best, and they were the best. So it was an easy.
Were there any other key drivers at play? So I know when we talk about the 8 key drivers, you mentioned the monopoly control. Were there others at play that made his business really strong?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the data, and that ties back to what's the moat around your business, which is what we refer to as monopoly control, and the relationship with the national pet adoption agency gave them supply one side of the market. And so to the extent that was an exclusive arrangement, I failed to ask him that, Jeremy. I should have asked him. I didn't. But in retrospect, I should have said, was that an exclusive deal? Meaning, did they have proprietary, locked in? If
Could
they
someone
had,
else do it?
Yeah,
Like, use
that
that
would have
data.
made it even more valuable because it would have been a barrier for anybody else to do it. So I didn't ask him. I should have. That was stupid. But in any event, that relationship, I think, was cool and critical to making sure that the moat around the data, meaning nobody else could just kind of overnight flip a switch and get the same degree of data that they had. I think that would have all lent to his monopoly control. And again, why they would have been so attractive to PetSmart. Again, that's a strategic acquisition, right? Like PetSmart's not buying them for their revenue or their profitability. It's not like, okay, we can add $200,000 in EBITDA to our. That's not what PetSmart's thinking. They're thinking we can take these millions of downloads and farm or mine that data to sell, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of dog food down the road.
Yeah, no, seems like a no-brainer for them to get the company. Yeah. So when we talk about the subscription models, the 9 subscription models, I know, from the app itself, and then there's the company acquiring them. What subscription models do you see at play with not just Darrell, but also the acquiring company, and how they should use this?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it. I think one of the 9 subscription models is insurance. And I know insurance is kind of a dirty word. Nobody likes to buy it. So it hesitant to even raise it. But when you adopt a pet, you always have the question, like, is this going to be a lemon? Like, am I adopting like some dog that's had some sort of tragic life, and therefore I'm going to be at the vet every 6 months with some horrific bill? And I think people who adopt dogs do it out of the best of intentions, but often have no no scope of what it's going to cost to own a dog, and some of the medical things that go into that. And so I think some sort of pet insurance offering could have been cool.
I love that.
So
sell that advice to PetSmart, John. Maybe they're doing it right now.
Okay, let's rewind. Don't tell them that. Let's go.
I bought pet insurance when I got my dog. I'm like, I don't want to worry about if something goes wrong. Right. So
that's a month, and you can kind of forget. I don't know what it costs you. Yeah. What does pet insurance cost?
I don't remember. I made this. It wasn't expensive, honestly.
Right.
I don't remember what it was, but I think it also, pays for a certain number of well visits a year. So it seemed like a no-brainer to me when I got it.
Yeah. Something there might have been cool. Again, he could have monetized that his own. He had the data again, so he could have chosen to monetize it rather than PetSmart. But
I love that.
But again, I think Darrell did a great job, and like, what an amazing story. I think he did an awesome job.
Anything else? I love the pet insurance. I'm just going to keep picking your brain till you give more good ideas. But anything else that you see, maybe he observed, or that you think could have made this even better?
No, I think, obviously when dealing with a strategic acquirer, when you have the attention of a strategic acquirer like a PetSmart, many large Fortune 500 companies, it's been my observation, are very defensive in their posture. So we as entrepreneurs are offensive in our posture, meaning we're always thinking about new ideas and new things that we can go do. Oftentimes, Fortune 500 companies have been tremendously successful. They've got a franchise, they've got a constituency, they've got an audience, they've got distribution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And their kind of starting point is like defense. How do I hold on to what I've got? And so I think that also plays out in the M&A world, meaning they don't want to lose deals to their greatest competitor. And so PetSmart competes with, what are some of the big U.S. retailers?
Petco, I think.
There's Petco. I think Darrell. Yeah. So, and I think Darrell, to his credit, did engage Petco, but there's 2 or 3 major competitors. And again, I don't want to Monday morning quarterback this, because I think he did a great job and PetSmart paid a premium. If I was, in a perfect world, it would have been great to get a direct offer from the 2 or 3 other major pet retailer, because once the CEO of like a major Fortune 500 company kind of gets wind that there's a deal that they want to do, and that they risk losing that, again, going back to the defensive posture, if someone else is going to outbid them, I think that's when the checkbook starts to open up pretty wide. So, I think had he created some more competitive tension, maybe with another Fortune 500 company, that might have juiced it. But again, overall, I think it was a great deal for Darrell.
Yeah, no, that was one thing that stuck out actually, because it goes into your book, The Art of Selling Your Business, is building your negotiation leverage. And you did have him talk about how he kind of drew out the tensions between Petco and PetSmart in that deal. So I love that part. Before we go to Jim, this is one of my favorite ones, Jim Estill, and for a couple of reasons. Is there anything else that surprised you about Darrell's story? The fact that he had two people at the company, that's what stuck out for me as shocking.
Yeah.
What anything that jumped out at you that was surprising?
I think we've covered a lot of it. I think what was interesting, I think, was he had I think he was a big brother or brother that he was in the dating business with, and I think he described his brother to me. I can't remember if it was on or off air, but as it was a pretty big success story. Like his brother is, I think he wouldn't mind me saying, is a bit more the front guy, and Darrell's a little bit more the behind the scenes guy in the dating business. So it's kind of fun to see Darrell have a win on his own, independent of his brother, which is kind of a cool backstory piece.
Yeah. Check that episode out. It was great. Jim Estill, this is, so as you described him on the episode, he's one of the most successful entrepreneurs people have never heard of. You kind of even said, like, you're like the Elon Musk of Canada. How have I not heard of you before? And so in 1975, Jim started EMJ Data, which was a technology distribution company, from the trunk of his car, and he grew it to $350 million in sales before taking it public. And he bought Danby Appliances, and he currently runs it, and he's grown it to over $400 million in sales. And so he invested in more than 100 startups. And his latest, it's called a side hustle, if you could call this a side hustle, right? Most people's side hustles are making like $1,000 a month or something like that. Well, Jim takes his side hustle to another level, because he created ShipperBee, right? And ShipperBee, if you imagine Uber for your packages, and instead of calling a courier company to pick up your packages, you call a business, the business schedules a pickup with ShipperBee, and they pick up your packages and distribute it to different. So it's more of a B2B. He invested $5 million of his own money, raised another $25 million, in 3 years grew it to 150 employees, and sold it. So I loved your surprise throughout the interview of like just uncovering these facts about Jim throughout. But go ahead. What are your thoughts on Jim?
It's funny because usually like when I see a Built to Sell Radio interview on my calendar, I do a bit of research. As the person who books the guest, her name is Haley Parkhill, our producer. Haley will put like notes, like watch this video, read the. And I must have been running from another meeting or whatever. I didn't read the notes. So I'm like, all right, ShipperBee, tell me about this company, right? And he's a little like, he was a little bit like, okay, sure, whatever, we jump in. And I guess most of the time he gets interviewed, the guest or the host probably butters him up with all kinds of like accolades like you just did. And I did none of that. And then I said to him, so like, how'd you get this thing off the ground? And he's like, well, I invested $5 million in my own money. I'm like, what'd you just say? Well, I invested $5 million.
He said it pretty nonchalant. Yeah, exactly.
Like he kind of writes that check every couple of days, and I'm like, wait, where did you get the $5 million to invest in ShipperBee? He's like, well, I've had some other businesses that I've started and sold, and then I've throughout the episode, I'm like, oh man, I feel like such a tool because he is like this incredibly successful, very like was on the board of RIM, like when Barack Obama was like using a BlackBerry, like BlackBerry was like this massive success story. Like it was the mobile phone that everybody wanted. And like he was on the board, anyway, long story short, I just made a fool of myself on the episode. But Jim was very gracious and didn't make me feel bad. But to your point, he built this cool company, ShipperBee. And you're right, it's kind of like the Uber of parcels. And like when you think about if you want to ship, and again, his perspective at Danby, major appliances, like if your light bulb, or that's not a good example, but if like your tray in your oven needs to be replaced, it's kind of a big, clunky thing that you've got to ship, and it weighs a lot. And it's and you don't have a lot of options. Like you could call up FedEx and say, can you ship this like massive big metal, thing that weighs 12 pounds is going to cost you $100. And like if you're Danby and you're doing that thousands of times a day, it starts to add up, right? And he's like, there's got to be a better way to ship like heavy, clunky stuff than just calling FedEx every minute, or UPS or whatever. And so he realized that there were a lot of people, oftentimes retired people actually, who had a few hours on their during the day that they weren't doing anything.
People, by the way, John, that like were retired. They were previous driver. Like they just wanted to stay busy, but they didn't want a full-time job. So they were fully vetted and experienced too.
Right.
It was really smart, super smart idea. I mean, it's literally the B2B Uber. I mean, he created it.
Exactly. So basically the way it works is you call up ShipperBee, go online or the app or whatever, you schedule your shipment, and somebody comes and picks it up at your factory or whatever, and then they send it to these hives. The hives are these like little pods, these lockers effectively, and somebody else. So it's sort of like daisy chains its way to the in a sort of almost like a hub and spoke model to its final destination. Now, as I describe it, it sounds, and I was like, but Jim, that sounds super unreliable, right? Like all these hives, and I've got to, like, one guy's going to drive. And he's like, yeah, but that's what FedEx does, right? Like FedEx uses a network of local hubs, and the package just goes seamlessly from one hub to the next, the next, and ultimately the last mile to your home or your office. And it's the same thing, but for your parcel. And yeah, I just thought it was cool business.
Well, John, I mean, I loved how it unfolded. I know maybe you thought internally you want to be prepared, but I love how it unfolded because you were just as surprised as everyone else hearing it. So you were, actually expressing that along with everyone else, as opposed to if you had prepared. I'm almost glad you were running late and didn't prepare for it, because I got to feel the surprise that I felt when he was saying these things. Okay. So I like that part. And he was super modest and super gracious about what he's done in his career. So I love that too about him. When we talk about the 8 key drivers, okay, what were some of the ones at play that you found with ShipperBee?
Well, the big one is one we talked about in the context of James Preble and a little bit Andrew Gizdecki as well. It was monopoly control. And so what Jim Estill did really, really well was he invested in protecting the idea. He realized early that what he was doing was quite innovative. The idea of Uber is been done, right? Lyft's ripped them off. I mean, like that exists, right? But an Uber for packages was unique. And so, as was the hive concept, they created these pods or hives that enable the package to be shipped along. And so he quite early realized that and invested to protect that IP and that like he patented that process. And a lot of, I'm sure you interview the entrepreneurs all the time, Jeremy. I'm sure you probably talk to some startups where they're like super protective over their idea. They're like, oh, I've got this great idea. I don't want to tell you about it. Or can you sign an NDA?
So many people. Yes, exactly.
Can you sign an NDA to, hear my story of a new coffee shop? I'm thinking it's like, no, I'm not signing your NDA, right? So everybody thinks their idea is sort of like very precious. You can't. In Jim's case, actually, what he created is worth protecting, and I think it did give him a moat around competitors because he had protected the idea of shipping packages using the same technology. So I think it was worth it. Yeah. Usually I'm like, don't bother spending money with your trademark lawyers. Like,
yeah, he spent a lot of money on patents, I believe.
Yeah, he spent over $1 million. Now he has that kind of money to blow, but but he spent $1 million to protect, simply just on IP lawyer, patent lawyers, on protecting the technology, which I think gave him a bit of a moat against competitors popping up. And I think that was, that was one of the great sort of successes. Again, he personally invested $5 million. He got another $20 million investment capital. So he had money, but he was blowing through money pretty quickly. Like, he went from 0 to like 100 employees in what you said in the intro, I think 3 years or something. Massive.
He scaled up really, like, in I think it was in Toronto area, right? I mean, that was he really focused in one area to prove out the model, and he probably proved it out that he could see this could be nationwide. That was only in one small city that he did this in, by the way. So the subscription models, when we talk about the 9 subscription models, what was at play there for Jim?
There was no subscription model that I'm aware of. In that case, could he have gotten his drivers to maybe pony up for some sort of platform fee, like, hey, be a ShipperBee driver, and it's going to be $50 a month, and that's going to keep you, your active ShipperBee, like. Could he have done something like that? Maybe. The benefit of getting people to opt in is, of course, once they make an investment in a platform, it makes them more likely to embed in, right? To invest in the platform. So he dealt with a lot of transient workers. Transient's probably too negative a term, but the gig economy workers, right?
Yeah.
And so with people like that, if you don't make them opt in, if they find a better job, like if delivering pizzas becomes more valuable, or being an Uber driver, like, all of a sudden you lose people. And what happened to Jim, and he describes this on the episode, sadly, when the pandemic hit, a lot of his drivers had to stop driving, and it was for medical reasons, because for the most part, they were retired, they were older, and they were the most susceptible to getting COVID. And so many of them just stopped kind of being out and about as a result of COVID, and therefore he had some challenges finding drivers. So maybe there would have been a platform play where they could have got some subscription revenue from drivers.
You bring up a good point, John, because I feel like maybe, I mean, again, like he did an amazing job, right, with what he did, but I think one of the things that held them back, there were a lot of costs involved in background checks and all the stuff they were doing with these people. And I think the company he sold to had all those pieces in place, which made it, they didn't have those costs because they already had drivers with the newspaper company. So that was, I think, a barrier of continuing to grow the driver base, whereas the company bought them already had the drivers in place. We should talk about that, because it's a key. When you talk about reasons strategic acquirers make strategic acquisitions, and when because along the way I was thinking, it's going to be FedEx or UPS that buys this company, or Purelator, which is kind of a Canadian version of UPS, and so he did have conversations with those players about acquiring the company. Ultimately, though, it was a different business. And again, I just talked to a guy last night who sold his company. It was a company called Wave. They do small business accounting software. He sold H&R Block, and he kind of said it a bit sheepishly, like of all companies, it was H&R Block, like you would never have thought. And equally, you never know who's going to have a strategic reason to buy your business. And I think it makes sense to think quite laterally about the universe of people that would buy. In the end, Jim sold his company to Torstar. Torstar stands for Toronto Star. That's the origin of the name Torstar. And it's the largest metropolitan daily newspaper in Canada. And of course, there's lots of other smaller regional newspapers that they own, et cetera. And in small markets, people still get newspapers delivered, if you can believe it. So they have drivers. And those drivers, as the newspaper business has atrophied, those drivers have become less and less busy. So they've got all across Southern Ontario, which is where ShipperBee was based and sort of piloted,
they had like hundreds of drivers. Many of them were underemployed, underutilized effectively. And so the idea of basically buying ShipperBee enabled them to immediately keep their drivers busy, keep their distribution network in place, yet giving them more stuff to do. And I never would have thought Tourstar, but when you actually think about it, it makes brilliant strategic sense. But again, it wasn't the obvious strategic acquirer. I think that's why, if I was coaching an entrepreneur through like, who's your most strategic acquirer, it would be like, really think laterally about like, who's out there with a big distribution force that needs more stuff in their bag to sell or to distribute, like those are some of the questions that come to mind, I think. But Jim, being so savvy, he kind of knew it and was successful.
First of all, John, I want to thank you. This has been amazing. I think everyone should check out the Built to Sell Radio. If you haven't checked out Built to Sell book, The Automatic Customer, The Art of Selling Your Business, and this is I love hearing your insights on these, John.
It was great. Let's do it again. I was too long-winded. I should have kept my answer shorter because I know we've got a bunch of questions we didn't get to, but we will do this again soon, and hopefully we'll be able to do some
there were a bunch
questions.
of people just commenting on. Like one person commented, "I love Andrew's story." They were rooting for him the whole way, and
nice.
And
nice.
This has been great. So
yeah. And so look, if any of these episodes are ones you want to kind of listen back to, or I think literally you can just put the person's name into a Google search bar, Built to Sell Radio, it'll pop right up. You can also just go to builttosell.com and there's a button for radio, and you'll see all the episodes in chronological order. And so the most recent 4 are the ones we talked about today. Jeremy, thanks for doing this. It was great to be with you. We'll see you again next month.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, everybody. Talk soon.
Hey, if you like today's episode, you're going to love my new book, The Art of Selling Your Business. The book was inspired by the cohort of my guests over the years who have been able to negotiate an exit far better than the benchmark in their industry, sometimes 2 or 3 times more than I would have expected. I was curious to understand the tactics and strategies of these entrepreneurs and what they do differently from average performers. The result is a playbook for punching above your weight when it comes to selling your business. To learn more, go to builttosell.com/selling, where we put together a collection of gifts for listeners who order the book. Just go to builttosell.com/selling. Built to Sell Radio is produced by Haley Parkhill. Our audio and video engineer is Dennis Labataglia. If you like what you've just heard, subscribe to get a new episode delivered to your inbox each week. Just go to builttosell.com.
Thanks for listening to Built to Sell Radio with John Warrillow. For complete show notes with links to additional resources, visit builttosell.com/blog. John is the founder of the Value Builder System. To find out how to improve the value of your business by 71%, visit valuebuildersystem.com. John is also the author of Built to Sell, Creating a Business That Can Thrive Without You, and The Automatic Customer, Creating a Subscription Business in Any Industry. Connect with John at facebook.com/builttosell or on Twitter at John Warrillow, WARRILLOW. Thanks for listening.